The night air was heavy with salt and silence. In a small coastal village of the Visayas, a fisherman made his way home. His shoulders ached from the day's labor, and his bare feet pressed into the sand still warm from the sun. The only sound was the slow rhythm of the tide and the whisper of palm fronds swaying in the midnight breeze. Yet beneath the quiet lay unease. Chickens stirred in their coops. Dogs barked, once, then whined and fell silent. The fisherman paused. He thought he heard wings, vast, leathery, dragging across the air. Not the quick flutter of bats, not the steady beat of herons, but something slower, heavier, deliberate. He looked up. There, silhouetted against the pale moon, a figure descended. At first, he thought it was a woman, her long hair unbound, her face strikingly beautiful, her eyes glimmering as though lit from within. But as she came closer, horror unfolded. Her body ended at the waist. The lower half was gone, abandoned somewhere in the darkness. From the exposed torso trailed strands of entrails that swayed like ropes in the air. Behind her, vast bat-like wings unfurled with a hiss of leather against wind. The fisherman's heart hammered. He remembered the old warnings whispered by his grandmother. Do not wander at night when the Manananggal flies. She will seek your wife, your unborn child, or you yourself if you gaze too long into her eyes. The creature smiled, her lips deep crimson against the pale glow of her skin. It was not the smile of a monster. It was soft, knowing, intimate, a smile that suggested not violence, but invitation. And that, perhaps, was the cruelest part of her terror. She landed on the nipa roof of his hut. Inside, his wife slept, her belly swollen with child. He screamed and ran forward, but the night already belonged to her. A name that haunts. This was the Manananggal, one of the most terrifying and seductive figures of Filipino folklore. Her name comes from the Tagalog word tanggal, meaning to separate or to remove. True to her name, the Manananggal detaches her upper body from her lower half at night. The lower half remains hidden, often in a thicket, a field, or a secluded corner, while the upper half takes flight on massive wings to hunt. She is a type of aswang, a broad category of shape-shifting ghouls and demons in Philippine myth. But while the aswang might appear as a dog, a pig, or a corpse-eater, the Manananggal is distinct. She is almost always female, and her monstrosity is bound tightly to themes of seduction, sexuality, and fear of female independence. The duality of beauty and horror. What sets the Manananggal apart is her duality. By day, she may appear as a beautiful woman, often a quiet, mysterious stranger, or even a wife living unnoticed in a village. She is graceful, modest, almost too ordinary. But by night, her true nature reveals itself. This transformation is the heart of her legend. In the stillness of midnight, when desire and dread are closest, she becomes both irresistible and terrifying. Her beauty draws men near, her intimacy disarms them. Yet in that closeness lies death. Her long tongue, thin, hollow like a proboscis, slips silently into windows, seeking the hearts of men or the unborn children in women's wombs. Thus, the Manananggal is not only a monster, she is a paradox. Beauty and monstrosity fused into one, love and horror inseparable. Origins in fear and history. The roots of the Manananggal legend are layered and complex. Long before Spanish colonizers arrived in the Philippines in the 16th century, Austronesian peoples told stories of night demons, ghouls, and flying spirits. Many of these beings targeted pregnant women, reflecting cultural anxieties about childbirth, a time of immense danger in pre-modern societies. With colonization, the figure of the Manananggal evolved. Spanish priests, horrified by local beliefs, described her as a demon, emphasizing her ties to the devil. The sexual undertones of her legend grew stronger, she became not just a monster, but a symbol of temptation, lust, and moral danger. Some scholars argue that missionaries shaped her image deliberately, using her as a cautionary tale against female sexuality outside the strict confines of Christian marriage. In this sense, the Manananggal is not only folklore, but also history. She embodies centuries of fear of women's bodies, fear of the unknown night, fear of desires that break the rules. The erotic undercurrent. Though she is monstrous, stories of the Manananggal often linger on her allure. Men describe her as beautiful before they describe her as terrifying. Her lips are crimson, her eyes luminous, her figure graceful. In villages, she sometimes appears not as a hideous beast, but as a mysterious woman who draws men into conversation, into intimacy, into trust. Only then does she reveal the horror beneath. This erotic tension lies at the heart of her myth. She seduces not with overt gestures, but with suggestion, with the promise of tenderness, the illusion of love. And in this, she mirrors the universal human fear, that the thing we most long for may be the very thing that destroys us. Why she endures. Even today, in rural parts of the Philippines, people still whisper of the Manananggal. Some claim to hear her wings, leathery and heavy, beating across the night sky. Others tell of finding lower halves of bodies in fields, signs, they say, that a Manananggal flew nearby. But more than superstition, her story endures because it resonates with timeless truths. She is the embodiment of forbidden desire, of intimacy tinged with death, of love that consumes. She is not only a monster in the dark, but a reflection of fears that live in every human heart.
The Manananggal is not simply a creature of fantasy. She is a product of centuries of history, belief, and cultural anxiety. To understand her, one must step into the world of the pre-colonial Philippines, then pass through the fires of Spanish colonization, Catholic re-education, and the survival of indigenous myths under foreign rule. Her story is a palimpsest, layers of fear, power, and desire written one over the other. Before the Spaniards, spirits of the night. Long before Spanish missionaries set foot on Philippine shores in the 16th century, the archipelago was alive with tales of the aswang. This term, broad, fluid, and ever-shifting, referred to a category of shapeshifters, ghouls, and demons that prowled the night. Among them were beings who flew in the dark, who drank blood, who targeted pregnant women and newborn children. For Austronesian communities, childbirth was a moment of extreme danger. With no access to modern medicine, complications during pregnancy were often fatal. Infant mortality was high, and the line between life and death was thin. It is no wonder, then, that spirits who preyed on women and infants became central in the collective imagination. The Manananggal was not yet named as such, but was already gestating in these fears, a nocturnal predator, half beautiful and half horrifying, who came in the darkest hours to claim life where it was most vulnerable. Spanish arrival and the demonization of desire. When the Spanish colonizers arrived in 1521, they brought not only guns and crosses, but a new framework for interpreting the unseen world. Catholic missionaries looked upon local deities and spirits as demons, tools of the devil himself. For the Spaniards, the Manananggal fit perfectly into their sermons. Here was a creature who split her body, abandoning her lower half, an image that could be read as both grotesque and sinful. She preyed upon the unborn, defying the sanctity of motherhood. She seduced men at night, embodying the dangers of lust. Spanish friars began writing about such creatures in their chronicles, sometimes folding local accounts into European demonology. In doing so, they sharpened the sexual undertones of the myth. The Manananggal became not only a predator, but a moral allegory, a warning against carnal temptation, against straying from the path of Christian virtue. Her crimson lips, her pale skin, her nocturnal visits, all mirrored the forbidden allure of the courtesan, the temptress, the woman outside the boundaries of virtue. Men feared her, but also longed for her. She was both punishment and fantasy, both warning and desire. Thus, under colonial rule, the Manananggal's identity crystallized. A demon, yes, but one who seduced before she destroyed. Horror and sexuality fused, each intensifying the other. Persistence across centuries. Even after centuries of colonization, after revolutions and wars, after modernization and migration, the Manananggal has never disappeared. She continues to haunt Philippine culture, in folk tales, in films, in whispered rumors of rural towns. Why? Because she is more than a monster. She is a symbol that gathers together many fears. Fear of the night, fear of women's power, fear of lust and desire, fear of the unknown forces that steal life from wombs and beds. In this way, she is timeless. Her leathery wings may belong to folklore, but the anxieties she embodies still beat in the human heart. Thus, the historical context of the Manananggal reveals her as a layered figure, born of pre-colonial spirits, sharpened by Catholic moralism, reflecting patriarchal suspicion, and sustained by the grief and fears of ordinary people. She is not just a demon of the night, but a creature born from the collision of culture, history, and desire.
The Manananggal is perhaps one of the most grotesque and unforgettable figures in world folklore, not simply because of what she does, but because of how she looks when she reveals her true self. She embodies contradiction, half beautiful, half hideous, half human, half beast. Her very transformation is a ritual of horror, one that speaks volumes about cultural fears and suppressed desires. By day, the disguise of normalcy. In most tales, the Manananggal by day is indistinguishable from any ordinary woman. She is often described as quiet, modest, and unassuming. She may live at the edge of a village, in a nipa hut shaded by trees, or within the town itself, blending seamlessly with her neighbors. Some stories portray her as a young maiden, striking in her beauty, but solitary in her habits. Others describe her as a wife or widow, her past veiled in secrecy. Her ordinariness is what makes her terrifying. She could be anyone. She could pass you in the market, smile politely, and you would never know that by nightfall, she will split her body in two and hunt. This duplicity reflects a deep-seated fear, the unknown hidden within the familiar, the predator disguised as the beloved. The splitting of the body. The transformation begins at night, usually around midnight. The Manananggal withdraws into secrecy, sometimes to her hut, sometimes to a secluded thicket. Then, with an act both physical and symbolic, she separates her upper half from her lower body. The lower half remains standing where she left it, rooted in the earth. Its entrails glisten in the moonlight, waiting like an open wound. The upper half sprouts vast leathery wings, stretching wide across the night. Some tales say she twists violently to break herself in two, others that she utters a guttural hiss, the sound of flesh tearing. In all versions, the act is both grotesque and liberating, a woman literally cutting herself free. The symbolism is clear. In a patriarchal culture, women were tied to reproduction, to their lower bodies, to the roles of wife and mother. The Manananggal's severing of her torso is not only monstrous, but rebellious. She abandons the half of her that ties her to fertility and domesticity. She chooses instead to become a creature of flight, hunger, and freedom. The horror of entrails. From the torn waist of her upper body dangle intestines and internal organs, swinging as she soars. This detail is not accidental. It magnifies her grotesque defiance of human order.
In traditional society, the body was supposed to be whole, complete, contained. To show the inside, the viscera, the parts meant to remain hidden, was obscene. Yet for the Manananggal, the exposed entrails are part of her power. They're a constant reminder that she is not bound by human norms. Her beauty is marred by horror, and her horror is made worse by beauty. Together they create an image so disturbing it is unforgettable. The wings of night. Once transformed, she takes to the skies. Her wings are described as enormous, bat-like, leathery. Villagers who claim to have heard her say the sound is unlike that of any bird or bat, heavy, dragging, as though the air itself resists her. Dogs whimper at the noise. Roosters sometimes crow out of rhythm, sensing a predator where no ordinary creature flies. Her flight allows her to traverse vast distances. She can leave her village behind, swoop into towns, hover above huts, and descend silently onto rooftops. In some accounts, she perches on the rafters of houses, her tongue slithering down through cracks to reach her victims. The wings are not only a means of hunting, they are symbols of her separation from earthly roles. She is no longer grounded. She is liberated, though her freedom is monstrous. The hollow tongue. Central to her feeding is her tongue, long, thin, hollow, like a proboscis. It slips silently into windows, searching for the vulnerable. For pregnant women, it penetrates the womb itself, drawing out the lifeblood of the unborn. For men, it seeks the heart or liver, the vital organs that sustain life. The imagery is undeniably charged with sexual undertones. The act of penetration, of extraction, of draining life, is an inversion of intimacy. Where human desire creates life, the Manananggal's desire consumes it. Her tongue is both a weapon and a grotesque parody of erotic contact. The vulnerability of her lower half. But for all her power, the Manananggal is not invincible. Her lower half remains rooted where she leaves it, a hollow shell, vulnerable to attack. Villagers say that sprinkling salt, ash, or crushed garlic into the exposed torso will prevent her from reattaching. When dawn comes, she will be destroyed, unable to reunite her halves. This vulnerability is symbolic, too. Her freedom is incomplete. Though she can fly, seduce, and kill, she cannot escape entirely. She is bound by the very act that gives her power. Her independence is fragile, contingent on secrecy. Should her weakness be exposed, she will perish. The erotic paradox of transformation. The Manananggal's metamorphosis is saturated with erotic paradox. By day, she appears restrained, modest, acceptable. By night, she unleashes her hidden nature, wild, free, and dangerously intimate. For men in traditional society, this image was both fantasy and nightmare. The idea of a woman who could cast off the limitations of propriety, who could seek pleasure and power outside the boundaries of marriage, was both alluring and terrifying. Her split body symbolized the split between the woman they desired and the woman they feared, the nurturer versus the destroyer, the beloved versus the predator. A body of allegory. The Manananggal's very form is allegory. She is at once a warning against women who live outside prescribed roles, a fantasy of female independence and sexual freedom, a horror born of the exposure of what should remain hidden, entrails, desire, mortality, a paradox, beautiful and grotesque, intimate and fatal. It is this complexity that makes her unforgettable. She is not simply a monster of the night sky, but a living symbol of society's deepest anxieties about sex, about women, about life and death. Thus, the image of the Manananggal is not merely terrifying for its gore. It is terrifying because it fuses beauty with horror, intimacy with destruction, freedom with monstrosity. In her torn body, her leathery wings, and her hollow tongue lies the very essence of folkloric terror. The fear that what we desire most may also be what destroys us.
Among the many monsters of world folklore, few blur the line between horror and intimacy as sharply as the Manananggal. She is not merely a predator who kills, she is a seductress who lures. Unlike beasts that attack with claws or fangs, the Manananggal often begins with a smile, a gaze, or a gesture that makes her victim step forward willingly. Her hunting grounds are not only rooftops and bedrooms, but also the quiet chambers of men's desires. The Mask of Beauty. Before she splits her body, before the wings unfold, she is a woman. Many tales emphasize her beauty in striking, almost poetic terms. Long black hair flowing down her back, lips painted deep crimson, skin pale beneath the moonlight. Some describe her laughter as light as falling water, others her voice as soft as silk in the dark. For lonely men, fishermen, travelers, officials away from home, this beauty was irresistible. To meet such a woman in the night felt like a miracle, a gift of companionship in a world of isolation. They did not see a predator, they saw a lover. This initial allure was her most powerful weapon. By appearing not monstrous but desirable, she ensnared men without ever raising a claw. The psychology of seduction. The Manananggal's seduction was not only physical, but psychological. In stories, she often appears when men are most vulnerable. Loneliness, a scholar studying alone, a fisherman walking home, a guard patrolling an empty street. Weariness, men drained by work or travel, their minds clouded, their defenses lowered. Desire, those who longed for beauty, affection, or intimacy in societies where restraint was demanded. She provided exactly what they craved. She listened to their words, met their eyes, touched their hands lightly. She made them feel chosen. In cultures where men often carried the burden of duty, the idea of being desired by such a woman, unearthly in her beauty, was intoxicating. Intimacy before death. What followed was often depicted with delicacy. The Manananggal did not pounce like a beast. Instead, she drew close. Her victims described feeling warmth before they felt fear. Her lips brushed their cheek, her hair fell across their skin, her breath touched their ear. These were the gestures of a lover, not a demon. But in the moment of intimacy, horror revealed itself. Her lips parted not for a kiss, but for the extension of her tongue. Long, thin, hollow, it pierced their skin with almost surgical precision. The man, dazed by affection, hardly realized what was happening. He felt not the agony of claws, but the weakness of being drained, life slipping away as if in an embrace. It was here that her erotic power was most devastating. She did not merely kill, she made death feel like love. The erotism of the hunt. Folklorists have long noted the erotic undertones in the way the Manananggal feeds. The act of her tongue penetrating flesh, the slow drawing out of blood or essence, the victim's gradual weakening, it is described not as violence, but as an inverted form of intimacy. Where human desire creates closeness and renewal, her desire consumes and destroys. Some accounts even describe men sighing as they died, their faces locked in strange half-smiles. Their last sensations were not terror, but a perverse semblance of satisfaction, as though they had surrendered willingly. Sexual escapades in folklore. Beyond solitary hunts, some traditions suggest the Manananggal was capable of repeated liaisons. She returned to the same men night after night, each time leaving them weaker, thinner, more pale. Villagers would whisper when a man seemed drained, his energy gone, his eyes hollow. "He has a secret lover," they said, "but she is no woman of this earth." These stories blur the line between myth and social commentary. Men who pursued affairs in secret, who wasted away from guilt or disease, could be said to have been visited by the Manananggal. The legend thus became a way of explaining hidden sexual encounters cloaked in supernatural imagery. The fear of women's desire. At the heart of these tales lies a deeper fear, the fear of female sexuality outside male control. The Manananggal is not a passive victim. She chooses her partners. She initiates contact. She decides when to stay and when to kill. In this sense, she is the inversion of traditional roles. For men of the time, this autonomy was terrifying. A woman who desired on her own terms, who seduced rather than was seduced, was unnatural. She became a monster not only because she killed, but because she inverted the power dynamic of intimacy. And yet, despite the fear, men in these tales could not resist her. She represented both danger and fantasy. A woman who chose them, not by duty, but by desire. A lover who appeared in the secrecy of night outside the rules of society. An intimacy that felt like freedom, even as it led to ruin. The Manananggal was thus both nightmare and dream, the embodiment of what men wanted but could not admit, punished by being given it in lethal form. Seduction as allegory. These sexual escapades were more than folklore, they were allegories. They warned of the dangers of temptation, of secret liaisons, of surrendering to lust. At the same time, they allowed the unspeakable to be spoken, the acknowledgement that desire exists, that intimacy is craved, that even death itself can wear the mask of love. Thus, the Manananggal's seduction is central to her legend. She is remembered not merely as a creature of entrails and wings, but as a woman whose beauty lured men willingly to their deaths. In her, horror and erotism intertwine so tightly that one cannot be separated from the other. She is the lover who destroys, the predator disguised as passion, the monster who kills not by force, but by desire itself.
The legend of the Manananggal is not only about the monster herself, but also about the people she preys upon. Folklore rarely imagines her striking at random. Instead, her victims follow patterns, each choice reflecting deep cultural fears, moral lessons, and anxieties that haunted Filipino communities for centuries. To understand her prey is to understand the society that gave her life. The lonely traveler. One of the most common victims is the solitary man on the road. A fisherman returning late from the shore, a merchant crossing fields under the moon, a farmer carrying tools home after dusk. These men were vulnerable not because they were weak, but because they were alone. Isolation was dangerous in pre-modern Philippines. Villages were small, and the wilderness beyond them was filled not only with real predators, but with imagined ones. The Manananggal symbolized that danger, the haunting reminder that to stray too far from the hearth at night was to risk an encounter with something unspeakable. The lonely traveler was also an archetype of temptation. To meet a woman in the darkness, beautiful and mysterious, was to be offered intimacy, free of social rules. In following her, the traveler chose not safety, but desire. And desire in folklore always came with a price. The weary husband. Another frequent victim is the husband who neglects his duties. In tales, he may be tired from work, inattentive to his wife, or seeking pleasure outside the home. The Manananggal appears to him as both punishment and seduction. She gives him what he seeks, affection, intimacy, escape, but drains him in the process. Villagers would whisper of men who wasted away, who grew thin and pale, who seemed too weak for their years. Sometimes this was illness, sometimes it was guilt. But in folklore, such men were said to have been chosen by the Manananggal. Their weakness became moralized, proof that indulgence outside the proper order led to ruin. The young and ambitious. Folklore also speaks of young men, eager and inexperienced, undone by the Manananggal's allure. These were dreamers, students, or hopefuls for the future, boys standing on the threshold of manhood. Their downfall was not cruelty, but naivete. They mistook seduction for love, attention for destiny. In a culture that demanded discipline, these stories warned against youthful recklessness. The Manananggal was a test, and those who lacked wisdom failed it. The symbolism here is potent. She embodies the dangers of passion unchecked, a force that devours ambition before it matures. Many versions linger on how these youths vanished into obscurity, their promise extinguished in the arms of a lover who was no woman at all. The pregnant woman. Perhaps the most chilling of her victims is the pregnant woman. The Manananggal is infamous for seeking out expectant mothers, creeping onto rooftops at night, letting her hollow tongue slip through the bamboo slats and piercing the womb to feed on the unborn child. This detail is not only grotesque, but deeply symbolic. In a pre-modern world where pregnancy and childbirth carried immense risks, the Manananggal embodied the ever-present fear of miscarriage and infant death. By personifying these tragedies as the work of a predator, communities found a way to externalize grief. But the symbolism goes further. The pregnant woman represented continuity, family, and the future. By attacking her, the Manananggal attacked the very foundation of society. She was not only a destroyer of individuals, but a threat to the survival of the community itself. The social outcast. Some versions describe her preying on those who already stood at the margins: widowers, drunkards, men estranged from their families. These victims, already vulnerable in life, became easy prey in story. Here, the legend doubles as moral commentary. To stray from society, to abandon one's place in the family or village, was to open oneself to supernatural ruin. The Manananggal became both literal predator and symbolic consequence, the fate awaiting those who did not belong. Patterns of selection. Across these archetypes, a pattern emerges. The isolated, travelers, loners, represent the danger of leaving the safety of the group. The unfaithful or inattentive, husbands, lovers, represent the danger of neglecting duty. The naive and ambitious, young men, represent the danger of reckless desire. The pregnant represent society's most fragile hope, always threatened. The outcasts represent the danger of existing outside norms. These victims were not chosen at random. They reflected the moral and emotional concerns of the culture that told the tales. Each one was a lesson. Beware of desire. Beware of neglect. Beware of stepping too far from the path. Victims as mirrors. In this sense, the victims of the Manananggal are mirrors more than characters. They show the community what it fears in itself: loneliness, lust, recklessness, fragility, and disobedience. By punishing these traits through the figure of the Manananggal, folklore reinforced the boundaries of acceptable life. And yet the victims are not portrayed only as guilty. Often they are sympathetic, pitiable, human. The scholar who wanted love, the fisherman who sought companionship, the mother who only wished to bear her child, these are not villains, but humans undone by forces beyond them. The Manananggal feeds on weakness, not because the weak are evil, but because all humans are vulnerable. Thus, the Manananggal's victims reveal her true nature. She is not chaos unleashed at random, but a predator with purpose. She chooses those whose lives are already frayed, whose desires are already dangerous, whose futures hang by a thread. In this, she is less a monster than a mirror, the embodiment of the cracks within human life, stretched wide until they break.
The legend of the Manananggal does not merely terrify with wings, entrails, or grotesque hunger. Its deepest horror lies in the paradox it creates, that love and death, intimacy and destruction are bound together. The men who fall into her arms do not die screaming. Many die sighing, smiling faintly, as though they had been kissed to death. The pregnant women who succumb are not slain with violence, but drained with a grotesque tenderness, as if their very lives were courted away. In these stories, the line between lover and killer disappears. The lovers embrace. In countless tales, the first moment of contact between the Manananggal and her victim resembles the beginning of a love affair. A lonely man meets her beneath the moon. She speaks softly, her words carrying the warmth of interest, her eyes reflecting a kind of secret knowledge. When she touches his hand, he feels not claws, but softness. When she leans closer, he smells perfume rather than decay. It is only later, too late, that he realizes her lips part not for a kiss, but for the slide of her tongue, hollow and sharp, seeking his bloodline. Yet in those first moments, he does not resist. He yields, because what he feels is not fear, but desire. This is the most chilling dimension of the myth, that the Manananggal does not conquer men by force, but by invitation. They die not because they were attacked, but because they surrendered willingly, mistaking destruction for intimacy. The lingering smile. Folklore often lingers on the detail of how victims look after death. Some are found with faint smiles, their faces eerily peaceful. Others appear simply drained, their bodies intact, but emptied of vitality. There is rarely blood spattered or limbs torn. Instead, there is a strange, almost gentle aftermath. This quiet horror amplifies the lesson. It suggests that the dead were not torn from life violently, but coaxed out of it, as if they allowed themselves to drift away in her arms. It is the horror of consent corrupted, the realization that the embrace of love can also be the embrace of death. Pregnant women, life interrupted. The stories of pregnant victims are perhaps the most haunting. The Manananggal does not rip apart the womb with claws. She slips her tongue into it silently, stealing life before it has even taken its first breath. The mother often does not awake, or wakes only with a sense of exhaustion, confusion, and sorrow. In the morning, the child is gone, and she is left weak, drained, mourning what she cannot even name. Here the paradox is sharpened. The act of intimacy, normally tied to reproduction and new life, becomes inverted. The Manananggal's act of intimacy destroys life before it begins. Where love and passion should create, hers annihilates. The horror lies not only in the act itself, but in what it symbolizes: the corruption of the most sacred bond between mother and child. Desire as fatal. As Pu Songling once captured in Chinese tales, the Filipinos expressed through the Manananggal that desire itself can be deadly. In her, erotic longing is never separate from mortality. The scholar who gazes into her eyes dies not only because she feeds on him, but because he allows himself to be consumed. The husband who seeks her warmth finds himself emptied, punished for surrendering to forbidden desire. Thus, love and death are not simply companions in these tales, they are indistinguishable. To choose one is to invite the other. The kiss is the grave. The ambiguity of affection. Some stories even dare to suggest that the Manananggal can feel genuine affection. A man may speak of nights spent with her, not in terror, but in joy. She may comfort him, listen to him, even encourage him in his ambitions. In rare versions, she falls in love, protecting rather than killing. And yet even then, her nature cannot be denied. Her need to feed, her inability to remain in human form, her separation from society, all doom the relationship from the start. This ambiguity makes her even more haunting. She is not a beast who kills without thought. She is a lover who may mean her affection sincerely, but whose very love carries death. The man who lies beside her can never know. Will she kiss him or drain him? Will she love him or feed on him? The uncertainty is the essence of the horror. Cultural resonance. For Filipino society, where intimacy was tied closely to morality, marriage, and duty, these stories carried immense weight. They warned that passion outside the accepted order was not only sinful, but fatal. At the same time, they gave form to the deeper, more universal fear that to love at all is to risk loss, to open oneself to the possibility of ruin. In the Manananggal, that risk is made literal. She embodies the dread that the very thing which gives joy, affection, desire, intimacy, may also bring destruction. The eternal knot. The Manananggal endures in memory, not because she is grotesque, but because she embodies this eternal knot of human experience, that love is inseparable from death. Every bond carries the shadow of loss. Every desire carries the risk of destruction. She makes this truth visible, unforgettable, embodied in wings, entrails, and lips stained red. Thus, she is not only a horror of the night sky, but a parable of the human condition. Her embrace is both a promise and a curse. Her smile is both an invitation and a farewell. In her, the sweetest touch becomes the deadliest, and the most intimate moment becomes the last.
No legend survives for centuries without a purpose. The Manananggal, like other figures of folklore, was never only a tale to frighten children or entertain adults around the fire. She was a vessel of warning, her grotesque body and seductive nature carrying layers of cultural instruction. To hear of her was to be entertained, yes, but also to be cautioned. The whispers of her wings in the night were also the whispers of morality in a society wrestling with desire, danger, and the fragility of life. The lesson of temptation. At the most obvious level, the Manananggal warned against temptation. Men who pursued her beauty or yielded to her smiles were destroyed. Husbands who strayed from their wives, travelers who followed mysterious women in the dark, youths who mistook lust for love, all fell into her trap. Her legend served as a vivid reminder to surrender to passion outside the boundaries of duty and discipline was not only immoral,
but fatal. In this way, she functioned as a cultural echo of Catholic sermons about sin reimagined in local form. But she was far more powerful than a priest's lecture. Her image, her body torn in half, her wings spreading over villages, was unforgettable. It burned the warning into memory: protection of the pregnant. Beyond men, the Manananggal also functioned as a terrifying guardian of women. She targeted pregnant mothers, embodying the dangers of miscarriage, stillbirth, and infant death. By telling stories of her nightly hunts, communities created rituals of protection. Pregnant women were instructed never to sleep alone. Garlic, salt, ash, and red string were placed in homes as wards. Sharp objects, scissors, knives, were set near the bed to repel her tongue. In these practices, the myth became medicine, offering families a sense of control in the face of tragedies they could not otherwise prevent. Her horror thus taught vigilance. Every precaution against the Manananggal was, in practice, a way of keeping watch over the most vulnerable members of society. Punishment of the outsider. The Manananggal also reflected suspicion toward those who lived outside social norms. Independent women, widows, spinsters, solitary strangers were often rumored to be Manananggals. This stigma was a warning in itself. Do not trust those who live apart. Do not stray from the collective. Do not let yourself or others fall outside the circle of family and community. While cruel in effect, this aspect of the myth reinforced cohesion. It reminded people that belonging was safety, and that independence, especially for women, was viewed as dangerous. The legend thus policed social boundaries, cloaking them in horror. Desire as disease. In some communities, the wasting away of a man, whether from illness, guilt, or secret affairs, was explained as the work of the Manananggal. Her nightly visits became a metaphor for disease and decline. Men who grew thin and weak, their vitality slipping away, were whispered to have been chosen by her. This interpretation carried a moral edge. Indulgence in desire, especially illicit desire, would drain the body and soul. The monster embodied the consequences of sins unspoken, giving them a form that villagers could name and fear. Colonial echoes. During Spanish colonization, priests seized upon the Manananggal myth to reinforce their own teachings. She became a local embodiment of the devil's temptations, a demon who punished lust and punished women who resisted social control. To fear her was to fear sin itself. But the myth also resisted colonial influence by carrying older indigenous meanings. She was not only a Catholic demon, but also a native spirit of the night, a reminder that the world was filled with forces beyond human control. Thus, she was both weaponized by the colonizers and preserved by the colonized, a paradox that gave her lasting power. A whisper, not a shout. What made the Manananggal's warning effective was its subtlety. She did not lecture, she seduced. Her lesson was not told in sermons, but enacted in stories of love turned fatal, of intimacy transformed into ruin. In this way, her myth entered the imagination not as a rule but as a fear. People remembered not the words of moralists, but the image of wings against the moon, of entrails dangling, of a tongue piercing the womb. Fear carried the lesson further than any law could. The universal truth. Beneath the cultural specifics lies a universal truth: the things we most long for may also destroy us. Desire is both gift and danger. Intimacy is both joy and risk. The Manananggal embodies this paradox in unforgettable form.
She is a horror story, yes, but also a philosophy lesson written in blood and moonlight. Thus, the Manananggal's legend functioned as more than folklore. It was a social compass, a moral teacher, a ritual manual, and a mirror of fear. Her wings were not only leathery and dark, but weighted with meaning. To hear her story was to learn how to live, cautiously, faithfully, and always aware that desire carries shadows.
When one steps back from the fragments of stories, the whispered warnings, the grotesque details of entrails and wings, what emerges is not simply a monster, but a symbol. The Manananggal is a tapestry woven from fear, desire, grief, and morality. She endures not because she is terrifying in appearance, though she is, but because she embodies truths too powerful to fade. The monster and the mirror. The Manananggal is not chaos personified. She is a mirror. In her beauty, men see their own longing. In her hunger, they see their own weakness. In her duality, half woman, half beast, they see the contradiction between the love they crave and the destruction it may bring. She is the lover who kills, the mother who steals children, the beauty who is also a nightmare. Each of these paradoxes reflects fears buried deep in human life. The fear of losing love, the fear of desire's consequences, the fear of death in the very place where we expect renewal. Why she haunts the night. Generations have whispered her name, not only to frighten children, but to explain what could not otherwise be explained. Why does a man waste away, pale and thin? Because the Manananggal drained him. Why did a child die in the womb, leaving the mother broken? Because she visited in the night. Why do some men stray into ruin, chasing beauty that cannot last? Because they followed the wings of temptation. Her story gives tragedy a face. It transforms sorrow into narrative, fear into caution, desire into warning. Love entwined with death. Above all, she survives because she dramatizes one of the oldest truths of human life, that love and death are inseparable. Every embrace carries risk. Every passion carries peril. Every bond carries the shadow of loss. The Manananggal simply makes this truth grotesquely visible. Her kiss is also a wound. Her touch is also a theft. Her beauty is also her prey's doom. In this, she joins a global pantheon of seductive monsters, Lamae of Greece, succubi of Europe, fox spirits of China and Japan. But she's uniquely Filipino. Her entrails swinging as she flies, her hunger focused on unborn life, her duality marked by the violent split of her own body. She is a creature of islands, born of both indigenous belief and colonial overlay, and she could exist nowhere else. Social control wrapped in wings. Her legend also functioned as a cultural guardrail. She punished men who strayed, stigmatized women who lived outside society's expectations, and terrified communities into vigilance for the vulnerable. In this way, she was a tool of morality, part warning against lust, part caution against independence, part ritual for protecting pregnant women. But she was never only a cage. She was also a release. Through her, suppressed desires could be acknowledged, if only in whispers. Through her, grief could be explained. Through her, the mysteries of the body, of life and death, of intimacy and fear could be spoken aloud without breaking taboos. Why she still flies. Even today, stories of the Manananggal persist. In rural provinces, people still claim to hear her wings. In modern films, she appears again and again, a blend of terror and allure. She has survived not because people literally believe in her, but because she continues to speak to truths that are timeless. That beauty can conceal danger, that intimacy can carry destruction, that desire is never free of risk, that women who step outside roles assigned by society are feared and demonized. Her wings are myth, but the fears they embody are real. Final reflection. The Manananggal is more than a monster of folklore. She is a paradox made flesh, seductive yet revolting, intimate yet fatal, human yet inhuman. To hear her story is to confront the shadow side of desire, to acknowledge the cost of passion, to face the truth that what we love most can also undo us. She is the darkness in the shape of a woman, the whisper in the night that draws you close even as it destroys you. She's the echo of grief, the embodiment of temptation, the guardian of boundaries crossed too far. And so when villagers place garlic on windowsills, when pregnant women tie red cords around their bellies, when men look twice at the shadows that move beneath the moon, they are not only guarding against a demon of the night, they are remembering a truth carried on leathery wings, that desire, once unchained, is both beautiful and deadly, that love and death are forever bound, that the Manananggal still flies.